My name is Linda Noor, and I'm very thankful for being invited here. I come from an organization in Norway working mostly with youth with minority background on different issues that are related to their situation on growing up in the Norwegian society. And since radicalization and extremism has been a very high on the political agenda the recent years, and also in the media, it has a lot of focus. So we also have to have focus on these topics, even though I think a lot of the youth are a bit tired of it, because there are, of course, other challenges in the society than extremism. Extremism, luckily, is still a very small problem, but of course, just some small act of violent extremism or terrorism can create a lot of chaos and problems. So we are working in different ways. We are creating arenas for debates, open debates and dialogue. We facilitate meetings between the youth and policymakers, journalists, researchers, and other people that are kind of delivering the premises for the debates in the society. Because we think it's very important that youth are being heard and that their feelings and their opinions about these subjects are getting lifted, because they are going to run our society in the future. So what I'm very concerned about is how we are reacting when we have the situation with increasing or growing extreme groups and increasing terrorist attacks. Just since June this year, there have been more than 80 attacks around the world in more than 22 countries. More than 1,300 people have been killed. And most of this, as you all know, is not in Europe or in the Western countries. Most of these attacks have been in different Muslim countries, most of them in countries where there are already high level of conflict, high level of refugee crisis. But there have also been an increasing number of attacks here in Europe, as you all know. And this means that the terror or terrorism is coming closer. And this also means that people in our society are getting much more aware of this. They are getting more afraid. And often, I don't think people are aware of the aim or the goals of the terrorists. In Norway, in 2011, we had a quite huge terrorist attack by a so-called lone wolf, Anders Behring Breivik, who was attacking one of the political buildings, but he was also attacking a summer camp for young participants in the Labour Party. So the interesting thing about both Breivik and, for example, groups like ISIS is that they are not attacking their primary enemy. Like, for example, Breivik, he was not attacking Muslims or immigrants, which is his main enemy. He don't want immigrants and Muslims in Norway at all, and he wants to create some kind of a civil war for this to happen. So he was attacking the political elite, but he was also, and mainly then the Labour political party, which he blamed for immigration policies in Norway. And he was especially attacking the youth, the multicultural youth, which are very liberal, very progressive, very open-minded, and that was his target. And it's the same with ISIS. When they, for example, had this huge attack in Paris, as you probably remember, when they attacked a restaurant street, they tried to have a bomb in a football match, and they also attacked a rock concert. This was the soft target of the progressive, liberal, multicultural youth. And that brings us into what is their main goal, is to create division. And they are not directly trying to appeal to their people who are going to agree with them in some things. Like, for example, some radical Muslims who might agree with some of the teachings of ISIS, or the right-wing nationalists who might also agree with some things of the ideology of Breivik. They are targeting those who are not agreeing with them, so that they might create enough polarization and enough politics of fear that's going to change the political scenery of the society. And of course, terrorism is very effective in that way, that it creates a lot of fear. It's not an effective strategy, because, like, for example, a terrorist attack is not going to make your enemy weaker in a military sense. But if you succeed in making the population afraid, and you succeed in making the politicians making stupid policies, because there is expectations when something happens that the politicians have to do something, even if it's maybe not the smart thing to do. They just have to do it because they have to please the public. And that could be quite dangerous road to go down. And if we look back to the terror attacks in New York in 2001, and if we look at it in a historical perspective, there is no doubt that that was the most successful terrorist attacks ever. Not because the attacks in itself, but because of the response, the reactions from the United States, from other countries. That was more than Al-Qaeda could ever dream about, because it really changed the way we are looking at the world, the way we are looking at the other, the way we are looking at Muslims or people we assume that are Muslims. And that is the situation that we are still in 15 years later. And so my previous speakers have already been into this, about differences between what is extremists, like people who are willing to engage in violence, and the people around that are maybe not willing to use violence, but they are still a part of the problem. And we have to take it seriously in a very early stage, because when a person first is getting into a more deeper ideology and getting deeper into environments that are fostering violence, it's very, very hard to make them turn around. But if we try to get and intervene in an early phase, and that's not easy either, but at least if we have that as a goal, that we have to think about early, it's not changing there. There. I have to use this, maybe? It's not working. It's changing here, but not on the... So back to what could be done when it comes to preventing extreme attitudes and extreme political or religious views in an early phase, is to cultivate tools of critical thinking and empathy, even from kindergarten. It's so important, especially in our time that we are bombarded with information from all sides all the time. And young children are being exposed for the internet from a very early age, all kinds of ideas floating. It's very hard to choose what is correct information, what is reliable information, and what is conspiracies or is it? Yeah, it's working now. Thank you. And one of the most important things from my view is to be aware of the need of belonging. This is so basic in all human beings that we desperately need somewhere to belong to. And as we see, for example, from Europe, there has been about 5,000 so-called foreign fighters living their safe lives in Europe, traveling to ISIS, to fight with ISIS. And for example, those who have left from North Africa or other countries which have much bigger problems with poverty and with where the society is already quite unsecure, there are different motivations for going to a group like ISIS. But from the people who are leaving from Europe and US, Australia, there is a common factor, and that is the need of belonging, a need of having an identity. And especially because among the foreign fighters, there is a very, very high representation of so-called second-generation immigrants, second-generation Muslims. They are born and raised most of their lives in Europe, but they still don't feel that they belong in our society. And that is actually a huge challenge when it comes to integration. I will say maybe one of the biggest challenges, especially in the European context, because we have our history, we have a very strong idea of national states and what it will say to be, for example, a Norwegian. In Norway still, even though we have a quite high number of immigrants, for example, in the capital of Oslo, there is 1/3 of the immigrants of the inhabitants of Oslo have immigrant background. But still, the idea of what it is to be Norwegian is mostly to look like me. It's not to have skin color that's darker, black hair, brown. That is still very hard to combine with a Norwegian national identity, even though we had immigration in Norway for now 50, 60 years. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we have to face. How are we going to create an inclusive identity that makes sense for young people growing up? And obviously, also when we are affected by terrorism, we are getting more polarized, we are getting more skeptical towards immigrants groups. We are starting, like for example, in France, they had debates on, for example, banning a Muslim swimsuit for women. It's not going to make us safer, but it's going to create more tension, it's going to create more division. And we had some of the same debates also. For example, in Norway, they are talking about banning different Muslim headscarves, veils. And it's not going to make us safer, but it's going to feed the idea that there is us and there is them and there is some animosity. I didn't have very much luck with my presentation, but it doesn't matter. It was not so many exciting things on the presentation anyway. Normally, I have a lot of very dramatic pictures from the ISIS propaganda and stuff. Yeah, so I think I will end here, and I hope we will have a fruitful discussion.
Thank you.